So what happens once we actually defund the police? Glad you asked. Okay. After exploring why the issue of police violence isn't just about good cops versus bad cops, why it's almost impossible to prosecute police due to qualified immunity, the Hollywood lie that cops spend all of their time catching dangerous criminals, and the history of law enforcement from its very racist origins through the still very racist war on drugs, we're finally here. A place of hope where we can explore what we'll do when and if we defund the police. But first, let's knock over one straw man argument. No one who is advocating for defunding the police actually believes that you can take money away from the police departments overnight and end up in some magical utopia with zero crime. Defunding the police is a long-term goal that works from a broader framework of divest, invest, where you take money budgeted for police and redirect it towards a variety of programs that get at the root of social harm. Why? Because reducing contact with cops, aka the people legally allowed to murder you if they think you might be a threat, will guarantee police violence does not occur. And don't just take my word for it. Decades of research show that when community-led efforts are given resources and money, they're able to prevent violence and harm just as effectively, if not more effectively, than police. So why defund the police? Well, in the words of former police officer Kyle Kazan, law enforcement is the dumping ground. When you don't know who to call, you call the cops. So who else can we call? Well, let's start with the most common way people interact with the police. Traffic stops. If you don't think traffic stops result in police violence, maybe try asking Sandra Bland or Samuel Du Bois. Oh wait, you can't, because the police killed Bland after she failed to use a turn signal, and Du Bois dared to drive with a missing front license plate. Fortunately, data shows us we don't need gun-toting officers to deal with traffic stops. Instead of police officers, we can use more traffic cameras, which are proven to make roads safer. Or we can create programs like Highways England, a British program which hires traffic officers who are distinct from police in that they're unarmed and actually carry equipment to help with breakdowns or car trouble. Imagine a world where you have a broken taillight and government officials send someone to help you fix the taillight and create a safer road for everyone. Wild, right? Let's move on to another area where police are often undertrained and overly aggressive. Mental health. Approximately 10% of police calls involve a person with mental illness, making police the nation's de facto first responders to mental health crises, which is, surprise, a terrible idea, because as recently as 2017, people with untreated mental illness were 16 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement, and 1 in 4 people killed by police were living with severe mental illness. Like George Zapontis, a man in Queens who was killed after police responded to a non-violent conflict with his neighbor and tased him at least 5 times. Or Gay Plack, a woman in Richmond, Virginia, who was killed by police in her own home after a doctor requested a wellness check. Fortunately, new solutions are being explored in cities like Dallas, Texas, and Eugene, Oregon. In Dallas, mental health clinicians and paramedics are now being dispatched to 911 calls involving mental health emergencies. The program, called Right Care, has resulted in a 19% drop in mental health calls that end up requiring an ambulance, and fewer people arrested or apprehended by police. In Eugene, Oregon, the Cahoots program, which serves as an alternative to police involvement, sends civilian crisis intervention teams trained in mental health and de-escalation tactics in response to 911 calls involving mental health. Cahoots estimates that at least 20% of all 911 calls in Eugene are directed towards them instead of police, and they've helped resolve emergencies using nonviolent, compassionate means while saving taxpayers over $15 million annually. Less horrific violence against marginalized communities and saving money in my America? Who could have guessed? Oh wait, all the people who've been calling for this for decades, like the Treatment Advocacy Center, a national nonprofit advocating for diverting people with mental illness from the criminal justice system and into appropriate treatment since 1998. The issue really boils down to budgets. One New York Times survey found that out of 150 cities in the US, police budgets have consistently risen across the board up until this year. And as federal aid for anti-poverty programs and social services dropped, the survey says local police were frequently asked to fill those gaps. The money is there, it's just not being allocated effectively. And within the movement to defund the police, how cities spend their money once they've divested from law enforcement is crucial, because the question isn't just how do you deal with the emergency after it's happened, it's also how can you prevent the emergency by addressing the root cause. Now, before we move on, let's remind ourselves that officers only spend about 5% of their time dealing with violent crime. But for instances where violence still happens, because it likely will, there is real evidence that shows civic and community-based organizations and initiatives can build safe neighborhoods without the costs and violence that come along with police and prisons. These models include programs like Safe Streets in Baltimore and Ceasefire in Chicago, which rely on teams that include violence prevention coordinators and full-time outreach workers. They specifically help communities impacted by gun homicides and gang violence, working with young people to find work and education opportunities, as well as de-escalating potentially violent conflicts. Many of their outreach workers are former gang members or formerly incarcerated people with ties to the communities they help. Over the span of about 9 years, Baltimore's Safe Streets program resulted in fewer homicides and non-fatal shootings. In the neighborhood of Cherry Hill, the program actually reduced homicide rates by 56%. But these initiatives are often given pennies on the dollar to do the kind of work that can stop cycles of harm, if they're funded by the government at all. How that money is spent matters. Programs run in conjunction with the crime lab at the University of Chicago are very effective and have data to back up their work. The Becoming a Man and Choose to Change programs rely on a combination of mentoring and cognitive behavioral therapy. They've reduced participants' involvement in violence by about 50%, and summer jobs programs have led to an over 40% decrease in violence. Even something as simple as creating more community gardens helps, seriously. A decades-long study in Philadelphia found that transforming vacant lots into green spaces correlated with a drop in gun assaults and a rise in healthy activity among residents. So we basically need cities to reboot Parks and Rec and put it in Law & Order's time slot. Look, we already know that 150 years of policing hasn't eradicated violent crime, and expecting new solutions to do so immediately is equally unrealistic. Defunding the police isn't actually just one idea, but an umbrella term for the many things we're going to need to try in order to create safer communities. And we'll be honest, some of these programs may not work. Sociologist Patrick Sharkey made a great point that leaders and lawmakers need a long-term commitment to building new coalitions to give them a chance. As he said in an interview with Vox, "I'm calling for a 10-year commitment. Give it a chance to fail. Give it a chance to go through scandals and mishaps and bumps along the way. And know that it's still going to be there in 10 years. There's no easy way to respond to every challenge in a community. This is hard work, and it asks for the cooperation of activists, community organizers, academics, lawmakers, and regular people in answering complicated questions. And not everyone agrees on whether we need to reduce the size and scope of policing or if police need to be dismantled altogether. But beyond logistical questions, it's also going to be difficult because it's a fundamental reimagining of society. In her New York Times opinion piece, activist Miriam Kaba describes her alternative to policing and incarceration as a vision of a different society, built on cooperation instead of individualism, on mutual aid instead of self-preservation. She asks, what would the country look like if it had billions of extra dollars to spend on housing, food, and education for all? The important thing is not to let up. We've got decades of data showing us the real devastation police forces enact within our communities. But research also shows us there are solutions to community safety that cut off the need for police at its root by providing opportunities in education. So what have we got to lose in imagining a better future? Thanks for watching. I'm Franchesca Ramsey. We'll see you next time right here on Decoded.